The cold glass wobbled in my hand when my wife suddenly squeezed my wrist until it hurt. "Don't turn around," she whispered. But how could I ignore the mocking laughter ringing behind my back when it came from my own biological son? I am Klaus Weber, 65 years old, a man who spent 35 grueling years building a mechanical factory in Stuttgart. I once thought that giving my son €250,000 would be the ultimate proof of our family bond. That was until that extravagant housewarming night when I stood completely frozen, listening to my own flesh and blood boast about how he set up a ruthless legal trap to strip me of everything. They thought a confused old man had personally signed his own financial death sentence without even knowing it, but they didn't know the real nightmare was just beginning. What terrible secret was hidden behind that contract? Before I uncover the truth, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what impressed you the most in this story. The cold, sparkling glass of sect wobbled in Klaus's hand when I suddenly used all my strength to squeeze the cuff of his suit jacket. It wasn't a normal, gentle reminder touch in the middle of a crowded party. It was a sharp, desperate clutch carrying sheer panic and an extreme warning. The kind of squeeze you give when a truck is hurtling toward an intersection at a red light, and the man you love most in the world is standing right on the crosswalk. "Don't turn around," I whispered, trying to keep my lips from trembling, my eyes pinned to a hidden spot behind my husband's back. "Right now. Don't turn around and look." That was the moment the perfect world of our Weber family officially shattered. I am Martha Weber. My husband, Klaus, just turned 65 this year. For the past 35 years, I had stepped back, quietly being a wife, a mother, so Klaus could pour his youth into building an automotive mechanical parts factory out of a dilapidated pile of cinder blocks right in the industrial heart of Stuttgart. When he sold that facility 2 years ago, we thought the rest of our lives would be a series of peaceful days. We thought that giving our son, Lucas, €250,000, exactly €250,000, to buy a house would be the absolute proof of our family bond. But tonight, standing in the middle of a lavish housewarming party at this €2 million villa on the prestigious Killersberg Hill, I bitterly realized a cruel truth. The air around me was suffocating with the smell of expensive wine, limited edition perfumes, and the wild ostentation of successful young people. And mixed in that vain atmosphere, piercing right through the loud thumping music, I heard the laughter of the very son I had given birth to. Lucas was standing next to the pool, sparkling with blue lights, holding a glass of amber liquor, surrounded by 3 of his college friends. His shirt collar was unbuttoned 1 button too many, displaying the arrogant, smug posture of someone who had never tasted the flavor of sweat and poverty. "My old man," Lucas's voice rang out, loud enough to slash a sharp line into my eardrums. "He thinks this is his money, like he actually has the delusion that just because he wired the down payment as a gift, he gets to decide everything." I held my breath. My chest felt like someone had poured liquid lead into it. The hand squeezing Klaus's wrist turned ice cold. At this distance, I knew Klaus heard every single word too. One of his friends burst out laughing, the sound of glasses clinking sharply. "You play it so cold, man." "This is business," Lucas sneered mockingly, his tone so cold and sharp that I no longer recognized the child I had raised. "I already told Johanna, just let the old man have his delusions of power. Whatever papers he gives us, just sign them blindly. We will handle the real legal paperwork ourselves later. He will never bother to read them carefully anyway. He trusts me completely." The heart of a mother inside me shattered. It wasn't just pain, it was the sheer horror of witnessing firsthand a parasite wearing the face of my own son. That 250 euros wasn't a lifeless number. It was the mornings Klaus woke up at 4:30 in the middle of the freezing German winter. It was the days I gritted my teeth and tightened our belts, scraping together every odd coin when the factory stood on the brink of bankruptcy in 2008. Lucas had begged for that money, using a hurt look to refuse any transparency, using the excuse that family affection doesn't need cumbersome paperwork. And now he stood there, turning the most sacred trust into a cheap joke, creating a fake power imbalance himself, believing that we were just old, naive people, easily manipulated. I feared Klaus would lose control. Any father in this situation would throw his wine glass to the floor, lunge forward to grab the collar of his unfilial son and destroy the party. But when I glanced at my husband's face, a strange chill ran down my spine. Klaus wasn't loudly angry at all. The extreme trauma seemed to have hit rock bottom and instantly frozen over. His eyes were still, terrifyingly cold. The brain of an old business wolf, a man who had negotiated for his life with the most ruthless corporations, suddenly booted up. He was holding it back. Klaus chose to swallow his fury deep inside, because he understood that going crazy right now was merely the reaction of the weak. "Let's go say hello to your daughter-in-law," Klaus whispered, his voice entirely flat without a single ripple. We walked toward the kitchen island. Johanna, the 33-year-old future daughter-in-law, a communications director and real estate notary, was standing there, gorgeous and proud. When she saw us, she flashed a sickeningly fake sweet smile, her eyes sparkling with the triumph of a smug person who believed she held the absolute upper hand. "How do you like our new house?" she asked, her voice ringing clear. "It is wonderful." Klaus smiled back, a flawless, spotless smile. "This marble kitchen island really suits you two. Congratulations on the new home." I stood next to him, my stomach twisting in knots as I had to nod and play along. A feeling of disgust rose right up to my throat when I realized we were being used as tools for profit by our own flesh and blood. The detail about handling the real legal paperwork ourselves later that Lucas had just blurted out kept haunting me. What exactly was that legal paper? What deadly clause had they laid out under the disguise of family affection? The drive home from the Killersberg Hill was drowned in a deadly silence. Outside, the Stuttgart night glided past the windows, the streetlights casting pale beams into the car. Neither of us spoke a word. There was no need for tears or screaming. Our silence was an unspoken treaty, an absolute consensus that the final boundary had been shattered. I placed my hand on Klaus's knee, feeling the rigid tension in every muscle fiber. I knew this battle had only just begun. The next morning, before the city even had time to wake up, Klaus was already sitting in his study. The clicking of the keyboard and the dry rustling of flipping papers echoed steadily. At exactly 8 in the morning, he picked up the phone and called Stefan Bauer, the diligent chief accountant who had been with our family for 20 years. I leaned against the doorframe, holding a hot cup of coffee, quietly observing my husband. "Stefan," Klaus's voice rang out, deep and cold, "I need you to quietly investigate something. Retrieve the entire property deed record and the loan structure of the villa on Killersberg that Lucas just bought. I want to know exactly where my 250 euros sits in the legal system." From that moment on, a torturous period of waiting began. For 3 agonizing days, we lived like ghosts in our own home. Every time Lucas or Johanna called to falsely check in, Klaus continued to perfectly play the role of a gentle, easygoing father. I had to bite my lip until it almost bled to keep from bursting out with bitter words when I heard the fake sweet voice of my future daughter-in-law. The torment strangled my mind, but we couldn't afford to alert the enemy. And then, on the morning of the fourth day, the phone on Klaus's desk vibrated. The name Stefan Bauer flashed on the screen. Klaus reached over and turned on the speakerphone. I held my breath, stepping closer to the oak desk. The space in the study was so quiet that I could clearly hear the sound of my own heart beating frantically. "Klaus," Stefan's voice came through the speaker, hesitant, slightly staticky, yet as sharp as a scalpel slicing through the atmosphere. The cautious tone of a man who specialized in handling financial loopholes now carried a sense of extreme dread. "I have thoroughly checked the entire file." Stefan took a deep breath. "Klaus, your 250,000 euros is not recorded as a gift on any document at all. It was turned into a secondary mortgage." Sitting way in the back, behind another massive private loan, Klaus's eyes went dark. His hand gripped the arm of his chair tightly, but the worst part didn't stop there. Stefan's next, concluding sentence struck us like a bolt of lightning, smashing every last bit of hope we had left in human decency. And worse, Klaus, Lucas's name is completely missing from the property ownership papers. The sole title holder controlling that entire asset is Johanna. The room sank into silence. An absolute silence, cold to the very bone. The perfect legal trap had been set, and our son had personally led his parents right into it, surrendering all power to someone else while still laughing smugly. My eyes blurred with tears, but Klaus didn't. He slowly reached out and turned off the phone. Without a single blink, the extreme suppression in his eyes had now transformed into a ruthless black flame, signaling that a purge was about to begin. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room had never sounded so heavy and thick. I sat huddled at the head of the dining table, my hands tightly intertwined, staring blankly at a cup of chamomile tea that had gone cold long ago. Klaus had left the house over 3 hours ago. He had arranged to have lunch with Lucas at a high-end steakhouse in central Stuttgart, carrying the shocking findings that our chief accountant Stefan Bauer had just unearthed. During those 3 hours, half of the motherly soul inside me was still screaming, clinging to the most fragile and naive ray of hope, that Lucas was just a foolish child, that he had been manipulated by his future wife Johanna, tricked into signing papers he didn't understand at all. I had hoped Klaus would return, push the door open, and say that our son was panicking, full of remorse, and begging his parents to help him escape this trap. But when the sound of tires grinding on the gravel driveway echoed and the front door opened, every last illusion I had was officially crushed. Klaus walked into the kitchen. He didn't look like a father who had just been through a heated argument, nor did he carry the relief of someone who had just cleared up a misunderstanding. Klaus's face wore a dull grey, so still and cold it was terrifying. It was the face of a general who had just witnessed his most trusted soldier plunge a fatal dagger into the back of his own army. Klaus slowly tossed a small piece of paper onto the marble table. It was the restaurant receipt. 1 portion of beef tenderloin steak for 45 euros. What did he say? I spoke, my voice shattering, scratching through my dry throat. Klaus pulled out a chair and sat across from me. His eyes were traced with red veins of extreme suppression. He wasn't panicked at all, Martha. He wasn't surprised. He didn't even blink. Klaus took a deep breath, his voice as flat as a frozen lake. When I placed the files on the table, he casually waved his fork over that 45 € stake. He looked at me, smiled, and called those fraudulent papers stripping away ownership the art of financial structuring. I felt my stomach twist into knots. Financial structuring. Exactly, Klaus sneered bitterly. He made the excuse that having Johanna as the sole name on the deed was for tax optimization and creating a liability shield. Our 250,000 euros is no longer a gift, but has been turned into a secondary mortgage sitting way in the back, behind a massive short-term loan of 450,000 euros. And the person lending that 450,000 euros is Felix Fischer, Johanna's biological brother. Every word Klaus said pounded into my mind like hammers striking right against my eardrums. There was no manipulation here at all. Lucas wasn't tricked. He knew clearly every single clause, every number, every legal barrier. In fact, he was the one who smiled, took his own father's hand, and thoughtfully led him straight into the guillotine. That very afternoon, we didn't allow ourselves to collapse. The extreme agony was quickly burned away by the flame of survival. We drove to the office of Sabine Wagner, a notorious commercial and real estate lawyer in Stuttgart. Sabine's office faintly smelled of document files and expensive roasted coffee. She sat behind a giant oak desk, her face showing no emotion as she flipped through every page of the documents we brought. 15 minutes passed in a suffocating silence. I could only hear the rustling of paper and the steady tapping rhythm from the fountain pen in Sabine's hand. Finally, she looked up, took off her thin-framed glasses and placed them on the table, her sharp eyes looking straight at Klaus. "Herr Weber, Frau Weber," Sabine spoke, as clear and cold as a surgical scalpel. "This is absolutely not a tax optimization structure. This is a financial death sentence." I subconsciously gripped the armrests of my leather chair tightly. "Your secondary mortgage has no repayment schedule, nor does it have any interest clauses or binding conditions," Sabine continued, her finger tapping hard on the last page of the contract. "And the worst part is your son is completely invisible on this asset. If Johanna defaults, or if she decides to sell the house, you don't have any automatic rights to recover your capital. The person who drafted this contract didn't do it to protect your son. They drafted it to establish a legal barrier aiming to completely strip away all your rights to intervene with that 250,000 euros. Klaus leaned forward, his voice low and hoarse. "Who was the one that drafted this pile of papers?" Sabine turned the contract around, pushing it toward us. Her finger pointed to an embossed seal in the bottom corner. "A notary office named Fischer and Fischer." The name slammed straight into my chest. Fischer. Matching perfectly with Johanna's last name, and matching the name of the loan shark brother Felix Fischer. We immediately left the lawyer's office and drove straight to the address of the Fischer and Fischer notary office. The Stuttgart sky had by now turned into the dull grey of a weary late afternoon. Klaus parked in the visitor lot, a short distance from the office door. "You wait here," Klaus said in a deep voice, pulling up his jacket collar. "I will go inside," playing the role of a walk-in client needing advice on buying a house. I sat back in the cold car, the heating system still humming, but unable to chase away the freezing chill, seeping deep into my bones. I watched the back of the man I had shared a bed with for 35 years. That back that once carried an entire mechanical factory through years of crisis now looked so lonely and heavy as he had to go investigate the betrayal of his own flesh and blood by himself. 10 minutes later, Klaus returned. He opened the car door, slumped into the driver's seat, his two hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned stark white. His breathing was heavy, blowing out streams of white smoke into the cold air. I talked to Julian, a young and unguarded receptionist. Klaus wheezed, his eyes staring blankly forward. While he was busy typing on the computer, I managed to peek at the staff introduction board on his screen. Klaus turned to look at me, his eyes carrying a deadly stillness. Fischer and Fischer. Co-founders Felix Fischer and Johanna Fischer. They don't just provide black market credit. Her own family were the ones who personally molded this contract, locking down the ownership. They ate up both ends of the transaction, legally validating it for themselves. The atmosphere in the car froze solid, a closed, sophisticated, and perfect scam network. And Lucas knew everything. That night, we couldn't close our eyes at all. The truth compressed in our chests like a ticking time bomb, demanding a final confirmation. The most naked and ruthless confirmation to permanently kill the weakness of maternal instinct inside me. At exactly 10:15 p.m., Klaus started the car. We drove back to the prestigious Killersberg Hill. Klaus didn't turn on the headlights when entering the street. He parked 2 blocks away from their €2 million villa. Without a word exchanged, the old couple quietly walked under the freezing cold of the night, slipping through neatly trimmed rows of trees, until we stopped behind the thick hedge bordering the edge of their backyard. The light from the kitchen cast a pale yellow glow onto the grass. The sliding glass door on the patio was slightly open. From our hiding spot in the dark, every sound inside echoed out perfectly clear. And then I heard Johanna's laughter, a ringing, giggling laugh, as sharp as broken glass, carrying the ultimate arrogant triumph. "Your dad is really hilarious. He even thanked you for explaining it to him so he could understand." Johanna's voice rang out, overflowing with satisfied contempt. "Honey," he thought he understood the issue. "That's the best part. Felix made the structure so tight that even if we break up or sell the house, his money will evaporate completely if we don't feel like paying. He threw €250,000 at us, and now he doesn't even own a doorknob in this house." I held my breath. Klaus's hand rested on my shoulder, squeezing me tightly in the dark. And the most disgusting thing, the final sound that delivered a fatal blow to my soul, was precisely Lucas's mockingly agreeable voice. He exhausted himself building the factory from a pile of rubble, but doesn't even know how to read a title report. Truly pathetic. We didn't listen anymore. Klaus quietly turned around, leading me to step back into the night. Throughout the walk back to the car, throughout the drive across the silent city of Stuttgart, I didn't shed a single tear. The disappointment, the trauma had reached its absolute breaking point and completely transformed into a cold, pure rage. The enemy wasn't far away. It wasn't some stranger daughter-in-law. The enemy was exactly the child I had given birth to, someone carrying the soul of a parasitic species, leisurely sucking the blood of his own parents and smugly calling it the stupidity of the elderly. When we stepped into the house, taking off our coats, the stillness of the home suddenly became incredibly clear. I walked straight into the kitchen. I didn't turn on the ceiling light, leaving only the dim yellow light from the range hood. My hands were strangely steady as I took the dark roasted coffee beans and put them into the machine. The sound of the grinder buzzed shrilly, harshly breaking the silent atmosphere. I brewed a pot of thick black coffee. No sugar, no milk, extremely bitter and piping hot. I poured 2 cups, brought them to the kitchen table, and set one down right in front of Klaus. I sat down looking straight into my husband's eyes. The veil of a hard-working, enduring mother for 32 years had been ripped apart, replaced by the coldness of a woman ready to burn everything to the ground to re-establish order. "Klaus," I spoke, my voice sharp and calmer than ever before. Then we have to strike a fatal blow. Klaus looked at me. In his eyes I saw a ruthless black flame had been lit. He didn't say a word, just slowly nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. A phone number he had saved from an old connection, the one person we needed the most right now. Ingrid Keller, an independent financial investigation expert, a notorious former economic crime investigator of the German Federal Criminal Police Office, BKA. The waiting ringtone echoed every cold beat into the space. The black market credit network of Felix Fischer, the name Fischer and Fischer, and the arrogance of the parasites. All were about to be put in the crosshairs. The hunt officially began. The smell of burnt, roasted coffee in our kitchen, on the morning of the 14th day, carried a bitter taste, just like the documents that Ingrid Keller had just laid out on the granite countertop. The former economic crime investigator of the German Federal Criminal Police Office, BKA, was not the type of person who liked to beat around the bush. She worked with numbers, with a ruthless coldness, exactly the way a surgeon separates every layer of flesh to find a tumor. Ingrid ran her finger along a bank statement printed in red, looking up at Klaus and me. "Don't think that your son is just a fool blinded by love," Ingrid said, her voice even without a single ripple. "The truth is much worse than that. Fischer and Fischer is not a normal notary office. They are a systematic meat grinder." I held my breath, feeling my chest being squeezed tight. Ingrid tapped her knuckles on the file. Over the past 4 years, the Fischer family has executed exactly 11 similar financial structuring scams. They target families with assets, using Johanna as a romantic bait or using Felix to play the role of a hot loan benefactor. They turn the hard-earned money of these families into shady secondary mortgages, with no interest, no repayment schedule, and always locked tight behind Felix's own massive black market credit loans. They eat commission fees on both ends of the transaction. There have been 3 families who filed complaints to the state notary chamber. 2 other families are desperately filing civil lawsuits. Your 250,000 euros is not a mistake. It is a fat bait that Lucas personally handed over to them. I shut my eyes tightly, not out of shock, but because the cruelty of reality was bringing sledgehammer blows down on my mind. The son I had carried and given birth to, the child for whom Klaus had woken up at 4:30 in the morning for 3 decades to provide a perfect future, was actually a broker for a scam ring. He knew everything clearly. He knew he was draining the blood of his own parents in exchange for a ticket to step into the fake high society of the Fischer siblings. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice completely hoarse. Klaus slowly stood up. He walked toward the window, looking out at the drizzle covering the city of Stuttgart in white. When he turned around, the image of a sharp mechanical factory director, a man who once managed hundreds of workers, had completely disappeared. Instead, his shoulders slumped, his back seemed more hunched, and his eyes suddenly became cloudy, exhausted. "We will give them what they want," Klaus whispered, a cold half-smile appearing on his lips. A confused old man, bewildered by the law, and an old woman who only knows how to worry about cooking. That was the beginning of the most stressful and suffocating 4 weeks of my life. A terrifying psychological play that my husband and I had to perform every day, right on the very stage of the enemy. The structure of this trap was called the Trojan Horse by Klaus. To crush the defense layer of arrogant people like Lukas and Johanna, Klaus had to turn himself into the absolute underdog. He started visiting their €2 million villa on the Killersberg Hill, frequently, always carrying a grimacing, exhausted expression. He deliberately left his reading glasses at home or complained about joint pain, and always made excuses that modern legal terms made his head spin. I went with him, playing the role of a sloppy mother, only caring about whether the living room curtains matched the carpet. Every time I stepped through that expensive oak door, I had to use all my willpower to keep my hands from trembling. I had to smile when Johanna called me her future mother-in-law, had to nod in agreement when she boasted about the sophistication of her brother Felix. The hatred boiled in my stomach like acid, but I had to swallow it down. Klaus's sloppy and fake weakness worked perfectly. Johanna and Lukas completely lost their guard. They believed that Klaus was truly old, senile, and too tired to pose any threat. Their arrogance made them careless, and they had no idea that, every time Klaus raised his hand to pat his chest complaining about a cough, his finger had skillfully touched the phone tucked neatly in his vest pocket. The recording mode was always turned on. I went through moments of suspense that took my breath away. The feeling of pressure weighed heavily on every nerve cell whenever Klaus pressed the record button. My heart was pounding like it wanted to jump out of my chest. What if the phone suddenly rang? What if the screen lit up and Johanna saw the red streak flashing? Every single conversation was another time I walked on a death wire, but the reward for that recklessness was priceless evidence. Through the recording device, Klaus had collected every arrogant excuse of Lukas. "Dad, those contracts are just formalities." Lukas's voice rang out during an afternoon of drinking tea on the patio when Klaus pretended to ask about the money again. "You don't need to read carefully. Felix did that just to protect the asset from taxes. The truth is, you don't have any rights on paper, but we are family, so what are you worrying about?" Or another time, Johanna sneered when Klaus went into the bathroom, telling Lukas, "Your old man is really docile. Just flatter him a bit, and he completely forgets the concept of collateral. Just let him believe he is doing charity." Every piece of audio recording was sent straight to the office of Sabine Wagner, our sharp real estate lawyer. But Sabine said that was still not enough to deliver a finishing blow. Recordings can prove they had bad intentions, but to completely break their legal arguments in court, we needed physical evidence signed by Lukas's own hand. A document proving he was aware of this entire scam structure from the very first day. And so, the climax of the play was set up by Klaus in the 4th week. One evening, Klaus invited Lukas to a restaurant to discuss some family matters. He brought along a pre-typed paper, his face grimacing with distress. I sat next to him, silently playing the role of an anxious wife. "Lukas, my mind is getting poor lately. My memory is all messed up," Klaus sighed, pushing the paper toward him. "I keep thinking about that €250,000 amount from the other day. Your mother keeps nagging, afraid that I'm old, and getting confused about debts. I want to simplify things for peace of mind before your wedding. I had someone type up a debt cancellation memo. I want to give you that amount for free. Cancel whatever mortgage that is, so I don't have to worry anymore." Lukas's eyes lit up. Greed completely clouded his rationality. He picked up the paper and skimmed through it. In reality, that was a deadly legal trap secretly drafted by Sabine Wagner herself. On the outside, it used the words of a senile old man wanting to give away money for free. But hidden deep within the clauses, it integrated the exact confirmation of the details of the old transaction. To cancel the debt, the document required Lukas to admit that Klaus's €250,000 had been deliberately placed as an indefinite secondary mortgage, ranking entirely behind Felix Fischer's €1,000 black market credit loan, and confirmed that Lucas fully understood this manipulative structure. What do you think? Sign here so I can take it for authorized notarization. Consider it done. From now on, that house belongs to Johanna. And you, no more debt to me, Klaus said, his voice trembling, acting out fatigue excellently. Lucas smiled triumphantly. He pulled his Mont Blanc fountain pen from his chest pocket. He was too smug, too blindly trusting that his father was a fool who knew nothing about the law, so much so that he didn't even bother asking Johanna or Felix to review the embedded clauses. "Dad, you are truly the best father," Lukács said, swiftly signing a sharp signature at the bottom of the page. "It's just a small memo. Let me sign it so you and Mom can have peace of mind." I watched the blue ink sink into the white paper. My heart skipped a beat. He didn't sign a debt cancellation memo. He had just personally signed a confession for financial fraud and confirmed the existence of the criminal structure set up by Fischer and Fischer. The noose had officially tightened around his neck. Klaus folded the paper, carefully tucking it into his pocket. He smiled kindly, but his eyes under the restaurant lights were as cold as ice. "Thank you, son. Everything is clear now." There were only 2 days left until the extravagant engagement party of Lucas and Johanna, held right in our backyard. We had sent out 22 invitation cards to the most prominent figures in the business and real estate circles of Stuttgart, exactly according to the ostentatious wishes of the future daughter-in-law. They thought that would be the night. They officially stepped to the pinnacle of fame. On the night before the party, the space in our house sank into a suffocating stillness. The grandfather clock struck exactly 11:30 at night. Klaus was sitting in the dim study, with only the blue light from the computer screen reflecting on his angular face. I stood leaning against the door, holding 2 warm cups of tea. Suddenly, the screen of Klaus's phone lit up. An encrypted message from Ingrid Keller. Klaus opened it to read. The space was so quiet that I could hear the wind whistling through the window crack. Klaus looked up, his eyes sharp, still, but carrying the power of a storm about to make landfall. "Ingrid just reported the news," he said, his voice a whisper but echoing like a verdict. "She has found 2 more victim families. The total damage of the system Fischer and Fischer set up has now exceeded €3 million. The Economic Crime Investigation Agency of the BKA has officially opened a secret file. I stepped forward, placing the teacup on the table. The evidence was enough. The weapon was loaded. The witnesses were ready. The entire network of the enemy was right in the crosshairs. Klaus leaned back in his chair. The darkness enveloped him, revealing only a faint half-smile. That was not the smile of a father, nor the smile of a factory owner. It was the absolute silent and ruthless smile of a seasoned hunter, a man who had patiently endured hardships for 4 weeks, and now his finger was placed ready on the trigger, locking the target right in the center of the scope. Tomorrow the battlefield will open, and there will not be a single ounce of mercy. The atmosphere of the engagement party sparkled under the strings of yellow lights strung across our backyard, reflecting a soft glow onto the perfectly trimmed grass. 22 guests. The most prominent figures in the business and real estate circles of Stuttgart were raising expensive champagne glasses, their buzzing laughter blending with the melodious string quartet music. The smell of grilled meat from the outdoor kitchen area mingled with the scent of luxury perfumes, creating an atmosphere of suffocating vanity. I sat at the center table, my 2 hands resting quietly on the lap of my dark silk dress. On the outside, I was a happy mother on her son's joyous day. But deep inside, every beat of my heart was counting down. The encrypted message from Ingrid Keller last night about the €3 million in damages and the classified BKA file was still burning in my mind. We didn't organize an engagement party. We had set up an execution ground, and the condemned prisoners were still smiling happily, completely unaware that their sentence had already been signed. On the opposite side of the table, Johanna sat radiantly in a custom-designed dress, the diamond on her finger sparkling every time she raised her hand to brush her hair. Her eyes occasionally glanced toward Klaus and me, a quick sweeping look carrying pity mixed with the triumph of a predator that had successfully stripped its prey without breaking a sweat. Then that moment finally arrived. The sharp ringing sound of a spoon gently tapping against a crystal glass echoed out. Lucas stood up. He loosened his silk tie, stretching his shoulders with the posture of a successful man mastering the world. Every gaze on the lawn converged on him. The space gradually sank into silence, waiting for the main character's speech. "Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight." Lucas spoke, his voice echoing out, confident and perfectly smooth. He raised his glass toward Johanna, giving her an affectionate smile before turning his eyes to the head of the table, where Klaus was sitting with a slightly hunched posture, his reading glasses dangling from his chest pocket. "Tonight, I especially want to raise a glass to my father," Lucas continued, his tone shifting into a patronizing humor that made my stomach twist. "A man who spent his whole life working with machines, but is always confused by the messy papers of the modern world. Some people struggle to build factories, while my father, he builds an adorable senility. Dad probably still isn't very familiar with mortgage laws or those complicated legal terms, but wow, his generosity is always the greatest thing for us." The whole table burst out laughing. A few older guests shook their heads with gentle smiles, thinking it was just a warm joke from a son to his easygoing old father. Johanna laughed the loudest. She raised her champagne glass high, pointing it straight at Klaus, her eyes flashing with a ruthless mockery she didn't even bother to hide. They were standing at the pinnacle of arrogance, believing they had swallowed a whole €250,000 from us without having to pay any price. But before their laughter could even fade, Klaus began to move. My husband braced both hands on the oak table. He slowly pushed his chair back and stood up, and in that very moment, I witnessed a transformation that made every sound in the garden seem to freeze solid. The hunched back, the exhausted face, the confused slowness of a senile old man. All the perfect disguise maintained over the past 4 weeks suddenly vanished into thin air. Klaus stood up straight, his shoulders broadened, solid and overwhelming, like a rocky mountain. His eyes were no longer cloudy, but razor-sharp, freezing cold, and terrifyingly still. That was not the gentle father who had just been made a laughingstock. That was the gaze of an alpha wolf, preparing to tear out the throat of its enemy. Sensing the oppressive shift in Klaus's energy, the laughter at the table fell dead silent. The atmosphere suddenly thickened. A few guests quietly lowered their wine glasses. "I actually understand mortgage laws very well, Lucas." Klaus spoke. He didn't shout at all. His volume was moderate, deep, but every word, every syllable dropped, carried the crushing weight of a submerged iceberg, slicing right through the silent Stuttgart night. "I understand very clearly," Klaus continued, his eyes pinned straight onto Lucas's gradually stiffening face, "that my €250,000 amount was not a gift, but was deliberately turned into an unsecured secondary mortgage. And I also understand extremely well that my money is sitting way in the back behind a €450,000 black market credit loan from Felix Fischer, Johanna's biological brother, and co-founder of the notary office that legalized all the fraudulent paperwork for that villa. Lucas's face instantly turned stark white. The patronizing smile on his lips froze, then crumbled. Johanna's mouth fell open, the hand holding her wine glass starting to tremble. The invited guests, including the major business partners of the Fisher Notary office, turned to look at each other with eyes full of absolute shock and sheer panic. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Lucas stammered, raising his hand to loosen his tie as if suddenly deprived of oxygen. "Today is the engagement party. This is not the time." "That is right. This is no longer the time to tell lies," Klaus interrupted, his cold voice sweeping away any attempt to argue. "Because your Fisher and Fisher Notary office didn't just scam me alone. Over the past 4 years, they have executed at least 11 similar shady financial structuring cases, stealing the hard-earned money of other families. 3 cases are under complaint, and as of 11:30 last night, the total damage they caused has exceeded €3 million. The backyard space fell into a deadly stillness. Sheer horror enveloped every single face. Klaus reached into his vest chest pocket, not to get his reading glasses. He pulled out his smartphone, slowly placing it face up on the table. The screen lit up, displaying an audio file paused at the starting line. He pressed the play button. Johanna's ringing, incredibly smug voice echoed from the speaker, amplified perfectly clear in the silent atmosphere. "Your dad is really hilarious," he thought. He understood the issue. "Felix made the structure so tight that even if we break up or sell the house, his money will evaporate completely. He threw €250,000 at us, and now he doesn't even own a doorknob in this house." And right after that, like a final knife stabbing through the stillness, was the mockingly agreeable laughter of Lucas himself. He exhausted himself building the factory, but doesn't even know how to read a title report. Truly pathetic. The recording ended. A dry beep sound rang out. I looked at Johanna. She looked like a wax doll that had just been thrown into a furnace. The perfect makeup couldn't hide the extreme panic of realizing her entire parasitic, despicable nature had just been stripped completely naked in front of her most important business partners. A few guests at the end of the table had fully stood up, their eyes looking at them, filled with contempt and disgust. Lucas was in absolute panic. He lunged forward, his 2 hands flailing in the air like a drowning man. "No, Dad, listen to me explain. That was just a misunderstanding. We have the memo." He desperately clung to the only excuse he thought he still possessed. "You were the one who told me to draft the debt cancellation memo. You said you were giving me that money for free, no more debts. I signed it." Klaus looked at his son, thrashing around, in desperation, a gaze without a single trace of mercy. There was only the absolute coldness of an established principle. He slowly reached into his inner pocket, pulling out the debt cancellation memo folded into quarters. The paper bore Lucas's sharp signature, made with a Mont Blanc fountain pen. "You think this is a debt cancellation paper?" Klaus spoke, his sound as sharp as a dagger. "This is not a debt cancellation paper, Lucas. To cancel the debt, this document required you to exactly confirm the existence of the fraudulent loan from the beginning. Confirm Felix Fisher's black market credit, and confirm you were fully aware of that manipulative structure. You personally signed a confession for the act of being an accomplice in financial fraud." Klaus raised the paper up to eye level. Then, to the absolute shock of everyone, his rough 2 hands, hands once calloused from steel and grease, tightly gripped the edge of the paper. Rip. The sound of tearing paper rang out sharply. Klaus tore the confession in half, then into quarters again. He let go. The scraps of white paper fluttered down like cold snow, landing straight onto Lucas's expensive porcelain dinner plate, lying bare among the unfinished pieces of grilled meat. "This is physical evidence," Klaus declared, his eyes pinned straight onto the shaking, fearful eyeballs of the man who used to be his son. "And on Monday morning next week, this entire file, along with the tracking report from the independent financial investigation expert, will be sitting neatly on the desk of the Baden-Württemberg State Prosecutor's Office." The Economic Crime Investigation Agency of the Federal Criminal Police has already opened the file. Lucas took a step back, his thigh slamming hard against the edge of the table, making the glasses rattle violently. He opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a single sound. Their honor, their careers, their delusional assets, and their entire fake high society disguise had been smashed to ashes in less than 10 minutes. They never held the upper hand. They were just puppets, dancing on the palm of a man who had spent his whole life controlling the most complex systems. Klaus's revenge had no tears. There were no moral preachings about family ethics or fatherly love. He used the exact weapon they worshipped the most: the cruelty of the law and objective evidence. Klaus reached down, picking up his glass of sect from the table. The revenge was complete. The suffocating, suppressed feeling in my chest over the past 4 weeks was completely released, giving way to a cold serenity. He raised his wine glass slightly, his eyes gliding past the petrified Johanna, then stopping at Lucas' happy engagement. Klaus said softly, without a hint of emotion. Then he set the wine glass down on the table. Klaus turned his back. His broad shoulders were solid, his footsteps calm, firm. He stepped past the guests, standing out of his way, not once turning his head to look back at the chaotic ruins of lies, arrogance, and humiliation that he had just personally burned to the ground. I stood up, lifting my chin proudly, quietly walking behind my husband into the darkness of the house, leaving the parasites behind, with the storm of the law roaring toward them. Monday morning would be a very long day. On Monday morning of that week, the bloody file I had promised, along with the entire tracking report from the financial investigation expert Ingrid Keller, was placed neatly on the desk of the Baden-Württemberg State Prosecutor's Office. Contrary to what people usually imagine about revenge, the collapse of a scam empire didn't happen with screams or loud smashing. It happened in cold legal documents, account freeze orders, and summons stamped with red government seals. From the perspective of a mother, a wife who had been pushed to the wall, I quietly watched every domino fall with a ruthless serenity. In just 10 short days, the entire fake high society world of the Fisher siblings was crushed to ashes. The prosecutor's office officially opened a criminal investigation into the Fisher and Fisher Notary Office. Felix Fisher's practice license was immediately revoked. The biggest shock came 2 weeks later, when other victim families, those who had been secretly stripped of their assets by them, simultaneously filed civil lawsuits. The compensation demand exploded to over 3.5 million euros. The entire black market credit network, the tax optimization covers, and the shady secondary mortgage contracts were all exposed in local newspapers. And do you know what the most ridiculous thing about parasites is? They are never loyal to each other when the host runs dry. When legal pressure and the threat of bankruptcy crashed down on them, the dreamlike love between Johanna and my son shattered faster than a glass dropping on a stone floor. Johanna lost all of her biggest clients. Her delusional assets were frozen. In pure panic to save herself, she turned around and tore into Lucas. The lavish engagement was cancelled exactly 1 week after the party in my backyard. By May, Lucas was officially kicked out of the €2 million villa on Killersberg Hill by Johanna, thrown out onto the street with just a few suitcases of clothes. The son who once leisurely sat eating a €45 steak and mocked his father's senility now had to move to a shabby, cramped, and cheap rental apartment in the suburbs of Stuttgart. 6 months passed since that night at the public execution ground. The sweltering summer gave way to falling autumn leaves, and then the bone-chilling cold of the German winter arrived. During those 6 months, Lucas tried to call many times. He left sobbing voicemails, messages begging for forgiveness, promises to start over. Klaus and I never picked up the phone. We didn't delete them, but we never replied either. We chose to let silence be the final answer. Our house gradually regained its inherent peaceful rhythm. Breakfasts no longer had suppressed sighs. Cups of coffee no longer carried the bitter taste of suspicion. Klaus no longer had to pretend to squint or hunch his back. He returned to being the solid, sharp man I had loved for 35 years. Serenity had truly returned until a night in late November. It was a blizzard night. The first snow of the season fell heavily, blanketing the roofs in Stuttgart and whipping hard against the living room windows. The freezing wind howled in bursts. The grandfather clock struck 10:30 p.m. I was standing in the kitchen, leisurely pouring hot water into a pot of chamomile tea. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. The doorbell rang. The piercing sound cut through the quiet space of the house. I paused, slightly, my hand gripping the handle of the teapot. Klaus, who was sitting reading a book on the armchair in the living room, also looked up. We looked at each other. No one said a word, but we both knew exactly who was standing out there in the middle of this blizzard. Klaus closed his book, slowly standing up. He walked out to the hallway, and I quietly followed behind, standing hidden in the darkness of the corner, turning from the kitchen, where I could see the front door but could not be seen. Klaus reached out, turned the latch, and opened the oak door. A freezing gust of wind rushed into the house, carrying fluttering snowflakes. Standing on the porch steps, under the pale yellow light, was Lucas. Our 32-year-old son looked so ruined it was hard to recognize him. He no longer wore flat designer suits or slick hair gel. He was shivering, huddled in a thin jacket entirely insufficient to withstand the sub-zero cold. His face was pale, his eye sockets sunken, his lips purple from the cold. "Dad," Lucas wheezed, his voice shattered, trembling violently from the cold. "I am sorry for coming so late, but I don't have money to pay rent anymore." They locked the door. "I know I don't have the right to beg, but tonight I truly have nowhere else to go." He looked up with bloodshot, tear-filled eyes at Klaus, then tried to stretch his neck to look inside the warm house, where the fireplace was blazing. "Just for tonight, Dad. Please, let me inside. I am freezing to death." Standing in the hidden corner, the heart of a mother inside me suddenly tightened. 32 years of raising him, the sleepless nights when he had a high fever as a child, the times I held his hand to help him walk, all those blood and flesh memories rippled in my chest like a conditioned reflex. The instinct wanting to rush out, wrap a warm blanket around him, and pull him into the kitchen almost knocked me down. And I knew Klaus was feeling the exact same thing. I saw my husband's broad shoulders slump slightly. The cold, sharp eyes of an old business wolf, in a fraction of a second, were replaced by the eyes of a father looking at his only son shivering in the snow. That moment of humane softening is the strongest weapon that parasites always rely on to survive. They believe that, no matter how cruel they are, maternal and paternal love will always be the ultimate safety net to catch them. But right at that boundary moment, the image of the secondary mortgage contract appeared. The image of the €45 stake. The image of his triumphant smile when he lured his father into signing a financial death sentence. The sound of him mocking that he was a pathetic, senile old man who exhausted himself building a factory but didn't know how to read paperwork. It all rushed back, cold and ruthless. Extreme clarity instantly extinguished all soft ripples. Blind love right now wasn't forgiveness. It was a betrayal of our own flesh and blood, our own sweat and tears. Klaus stood up, straight. The moment of softening was dead. The frame seemed to freeze completely. He looked straight into the eyes of his shivering son, his gaze entirely empty. No resentment, no pity, just an absolute stillness, the temperature of absolute zero. "You have a place to go, Lucas," Klaus spoke. The sound was steady, flat, razor-sharp, cutting through the howling wind. "Just not here, not tonight. And never again until you learn how to pay the price yourself for the barriers you erected with your own hands." Lucas's eyes widened in horror. "Dad, please don't, Dad. Mum! Mum!" He screamed in panic. As he realized the final verdict had been delivered, every hope of being a parasite was completely smashed. Klaus didn't blink. He took a step back. Good night. The oak door slammed shut, decisively and tightly. The screaming of Lucas outside was instantly soundproofed, leaving only the distant growl of the storm wind. Klaus stood silently in front of the closed door for a few seconds. Then he turned around. His shoulders were light. The entire burden of forced forgiveness, of the exploitation loop named family affection, had officially been cast off. He walked into the kitchen, where I had stepped out of the hidden corner at some point. On the marble table, I had already brewed 2 piping hot cups of chamomile tea. Steam rising, carrying a sweet, soothing scent, easing the chill of the winter night. I pushed a teacup toward him, smiling, a smile of absolute understanding. "Are you okay?" Klaus sat down on the chair, pressing both hands against the side of the teacup to warm them. His eyes sparkled with the peace I had waited for over many years. He looked at me, took a small sip of tea, and smiled in relief. "I understand very well about mortgages now." The kitchen sank into the warm yellow light, leaving the blizzard and the delusions of a scammer out there. We sat there, peacefully enjoying the fruits of transparency. You know, loving children is always the deepest instinct of parents. We are willing to sacrifice our whole lives, gritting our teeth through every storm to give them wings. But remember that family ties never mean allowing others to strip away your respect and your right to self-defense. Using the word family to cover up transparency, using blood ties to excuse financial ambiguity, that is the most perfect trap of those who always hope you never carefully read the smallest words on a contract. Cruelty sometimes is the strongest and most primal form of protecting love. The story of the Weber family will close here. Thank you for listening and accompanying me through every chapter of this turbulent but incredibly rewarding journey. If this story brought you valuable reflections or helped you realize the necessary boundaries to protect yourself and your loved ones, please hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue listening to the next meaningful stories. And the final advice I want to send you through this story: no matter what relationship you are facing, even if it is your own flesh and blood, always let love lead the way. But you must let reason hold the steering wheel. Signing a piece of paper only takes 4 seconds, but staying alert will protect you for a lifetime. Wishing you always remain steady and at peace.